Charles Robert Watts was born at University College in London on June 2, 1941, 3 years before Hitler's doodlebugs were doing their best to wipe out the inhabitants of the capital city. He was born to Charles Watts Sr. and his wife Lillian, and having started his life in Wembley went on to grow up with his sister in Kingsbury, 3 miles to the north. At school he showed a penchant and ability for art, cricket and football. His next-door neighbor was a slightly younger chap called Dave Green, and they became great friends. Charlie and Dave were into the jazz of Jelly Roll Morton, Charlie Parker, and Thelonious Monk, and eventually Charlie became a drummer and Dave a bass player, who went on to work with Humphrey Lyttelton. In 1955 Charlie's parents invested their money wisely in a drum kit to replace the old banjo he'd taken the neck off and played with wire brushes. This was all in an attempt to sound like Chico Hamilton, and indeed Charlie and Dave formed the Joe Jones All-Stars specifically to play the same style of music. After finishing his education at Tyler's Croft Secondary Modern, he enrolled himself at Harrow Art School, where he stayed until 1960 before taking up the role of a graphic designer for a London advertising agency. He was still playing drums at the time, although neither seriously nor successfully, until he made the acquaintance of a chap called Alexis Korner, who asked him if he'd like to join the group he was leading called Blues Incorporated. Charlie didn't join Alexis immediately because he had just landed a job as a graphic designer in Denmark, but 2 years later he took the gig for a short spell, even though at the time he was also in contact with Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ian Stewart and Brian Jones. In 1963 he saw the light and threw his lot in with the Rolling Stones. A year or so later, possibly to show where his musical aspirations lay, he published a book of cartoons related to Charlie Parker called Ode to a High-Flying Bird. Besides his work as a musician, Watts contributed graphic art and comic strips to early Rolling Stones records such as the Between the Buttons record sleeve, and was responsible for the 1975 tour announcement press conference in New York City. The band surprised the throng of waiting reporters by driving and playing Brown Sugar on the back of a flatbed truck in the middle of Manhattan traffic. Watts remembered this was a common way for New Orleans jazz bands to promote upcoming dates. Moreover, with Jagger, he designed the elaborate stages for tours, first contributing to the lotus-shaped design of that 1975 tour of the Americas, as well as the 1989-1990 Steel Wheels/Urban Jungle Tour, the 1997-1998 Bridges to Babylon Tour, the 2002-2003 Licks Tour, and the 2005-2007 A Bigger Bang Tour. In June 2004, Watts was diagnosed with throat cancer, despite having quit smoking in the late 1980s, and underwent a course of radiotherapy, and it later went into remission. On August 5, 2021, it was reported that Watts had elected to sit out the resumption of the US No Filter tour owing to a medical procedure involving his heart, and that Steve Jordan would temporarily replace him on drums. Watts died at a London hospital on August 24, 2021, at the age of 80, with his family around him. Watts' bandmates Jagger and Richards paid tribute to him. Several other classic rock celebrities also paid tribute to Watts following his death, including Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Elton John, Brian Wilson, Pete Townsend, Bryan Adams, Brian May, Roger Taylor, Liam Gallagher, Kenny Jones and Chad Smith. The day following his passing, the Rolling Stones official website contents were replaced with a single picture of Watts in his memory.